The courtroom exploded with a single piercing scream. A 6-year-old girl, trapped in a fraudulent custody scheme, saw the man they called a mafia boss walk through the doors. And in that instant, the entire kidnapping plot shattered. Because the man she was screaming for, the man she was fighting to reach, was her real father. This is the story of how a perfectly fabricated legal kidnapping, built on forged papers and corrupt witnesses, was undone by a single moment of raw recognition. For years, the girl had been told her father was a danger, a monster she needed protection from. The court had agreed, granting full custody to the woman who claimed to be her aunt. But in that courtroom, the truth walked in wearing a suit. And the real question became, who was actually being protected and from what? Her name was Sophia. For 6 years, she lived with the woman she called Aunt Elena in a quiet suburb, a life built on a foundation of careful lies. The story she knew was simple, tragic. Her mother had died shortly after her birth. Her father, a man named Marco Rossi, was unstable, violent, and wanted nothing to do with her. Elena Vasquez, her mother's devoted sister, had stepped in to raise her, fighting tirelessly for legal guardianship to keep her safe. But every piece of that story was manufactured. Sophia's mother, Isabella Rossi, was not dead. She was living under a new name in another state, believing her daughter had been taken by child services after she was deemed an unfit parent due to her association with Marco's world. The reports that condemned her were forgeries. The social worker who filed them, a corrupt official on Elena's payroll. Elena Vasquez was not Isabella's sister. She was a sophisticated fixer for the Morty crime family, a rival organization that had been waging a cold war against Marco Rossi's operations for a decade. Her mission was not protection, but possession. Sophia was leverage, a living piece of psychological warfare hidden in plain sight. The scheme was chilling in its bureaucratic elegance. Elena used a network of compromised professionals, a lawyer, a psychologist, and a family court clerk to build an impregnable paper trail. Birth certificates were altered. School records were created. Neighbors were given scripts about the sweet little girl being raised by her courageous aunt after a family tragedy. The goal was never just to hide Sophia. It was to erase Marco Rossi's daughter and replace her with Elena Vasquez's ward, a child the courts would never think to return to a man they believed was a monster. And Marco Rossi played his part perfectly, though he never knew it. His reputation as a ruthless, if strategic, businessman was real. The whispers of his involvement in organized crime were true. Elena's operatives fed those whispers to the right ears, embellishing them with claims of domestic volatility and threats. They made sure anonymous tips about his dangerous lifestyle reached Child Protective Services, painting a picture of a home no child could ever safely enter. For Marco, Sophia was his greatest secret and his deepest wound. He and Isabella had separated under the weight of his dangerous life when she was pregnant. He provided for them from a distance, through layers of intermediaries, to keep them off his enemies' radar. When Isabella suddenly disappeared with his daughter, he was told she had chosen to cut all ties to spare the child his legacy. He believed his own notoriety had cost him his family. He never imagined they had been stolen. The first crack in Elena's scheme appeared not from Marco's world, but from within the system she had corrupted. A newly assigned caseworker, David Miller, was reviewing old files as part of a routine audit. Sophia's case, now 6 years old, was flagged for a simple reason: a missing signature. The psychologist who had evaluated Marco Rossi, declaring him a threat, had never actually licensed in the state where the report was filed. It was a tiny clerical error in a mountain of paperwork, the kind a busy clerk might miss. David Miller did not. His inquiry was routine, a request for clarification sent to Elena's lawyer. But in a world built on perfect lies, a single honest question is a seismic event. Elena's lawyer brushed it off, claiming a scanning error. Yet, the inquiry created a digital footprint. It prompted the family court's administrative software to generate an automatic notification. A case review hearing was scheduled. The hearing was supposed to be a formality, a chance for Elena's lawyer to submit the corrected document, for the judge to stamp it, and for the file to be closed for another 6 years. Elena assured her handlers in the Morty family that it was under control, but the notification, by law, had to be sent to all interested parties listed on the original petition. And one of those parties, listed 6 years ago but believed to be unreachable, was Marco Rossi, care of a long-defunct post office box managed by a lawyer who was still, secretly, on his payroll. That single sheet of paper, generated by a computer glitch, traveled from the county courthouse to a dusty mailbox, to a law office, and finally into the hands of a man who had long ago stopped hopping. It stated the time, date, and case number for a custody review regarding minor child, Sofia Rossi. Marco Rossi stared at his daughter's name on the official document. All the protective instincts he had buried, all the grief he had channeled into his work, erupted at once. He didn't know who Elena Vasquez was. He didn't understand the hearing, but he saw a chance, a thread leading to the daughter he thought he had lost forever. He would walk into that courtroom, not as a mob boss, but as a father. He had no idea he was walking directly into the heart of a trap designed to destroy him, or that the little girl at the center of it all would recognize him instantly. Because Elena had made one critical, arrogant mistake. She had shown Sofia a single, old photograph of her father, telling her this was the dangerous man she must never speak to if he ever appeared. She thought she was inoculating the child against curiosity. Instead, she had given Sofia a face to dream about, to study, to secretly hope for. And when that man finally walked through the courtroom doors, the carefully constructed world of lies shattered with a single, unstoppable scream. In the frozen silence that followed Sofia's scream, every lie in the room was laid bare. The judge, mid-sentence, stopped. The bailiff's hand went to his belt. Elena Vasquez's face, a mask of calm concern just seconds before, drained of all color. She tightened her grip on Sofia's shoulder, a silent command to stop, but the child was a force of nature, straining against her, tears streaming as she reached for the man in the doorway. Marco Rossi stood transfixed. The legal summons was a piece of paper. This was a heart attack. The little girl with blonde hair, the one in the simple dress fighting to get to him, was the living image of Isabella. His mind, trained for threats and ambushes, short-circuited. All his strategies, all his precautions evaporated. He took one step forward, then another, his focus narrowing to the child whose name he had whispered but never thought he'd see. Order, I will have order. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, but the chaos was just beginning. Elena's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, demanding the removal of this disruptive individual. But Marco's own lawyer, a sharp litigator named Arthur Brandt, who specialized in keeping wealthy, complicated clients out of the public eye, was already moving. He placed a restraining hand on Marco's arm, not to stop him, but to anchor him. Your Honor, Brandt's voice cut through the noise, calm and lethal. My client, Marco Rossi, is the biological father of the minor, Sofia Rossi. He is a party to this proceeding and has every right to be present. More importantly, the child seems to recognize him. That statement hung in the air. The child seems to recognize him. It was the pin pulled on Elena's entire grenade. The custody order she held was built on the foundational claim that Marco was an absent, dangerous stranger. A child screaming for him, trying to run to him, was evidence no forged document could contradict. The judge, a weary man named Harold Jenkins, with 30 years on the family court bench, peered over his glasses. He'd seen parental alienation, he'd seen coached children, but the raw, desperate recognition in Sofia's cries hit a different chord. Ms. Vasquez, he said, his voice low, can you explain why the child is so distressed by this man's presence if, as your filings state, she has no relationship with him and fears him? Elena's composure was a masterpiece of desperate acting. Your Honor, she's confused. She's seen photographs I showed her for her own safety to warn her. This is a traumatic reaction to the image of a man she's been taught represents danger. It was a clever, nimble lie, pivoting from no relationship to traumatic fear. But it was her first public mistake. She had just admitted to showing the child his picture. Marco finally found his voice. It wasn't the commanding tone of a boss, but the raw, broken plea of a father. I have never met my daughter. She was taken from her mother. I was told they wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't even know where she was until I got this notice. He held up the court summons. That woman, he said, pointing at Elena, his control slipping into something dark and venomous, is not her aunt. I don't know who she is, but she has my child. The hearing descended into procedural pandemonium. The judge, sensing a catastrophe unfolding in his courtroom, called for an immediate recess. He ordered Sofia to be taken to a private interview room with a court-appointed guardian ad litem, a specialist assigned to represent only the child's interests. He barred both Marco and Elena from approaching her. And then he made a decision that sent a shockwave through Elena's carefully built fortress. He ordered an emergency review of the entire case file, starting immediately, and requested the presence of the original caseworker, David Miller. As bailiffs escorted a sobbing Sophia from the room, her eyes locked on Marco until the doors swung shut. The battle lines were drawn not in the underworld, but in the records room of the county courthouse. Elena retreated to a hallway phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The call she made wasn't to her lawyer, but to a number with a New Jersey area code. "The father is here," she hissed, her back to the wall. The child recognized him. "Jenkins is opening the file. The Miller problem is now active." The voice on the other end was cold, calm. "Contain it. Use the assets. The objective is unchanged. The father does not get the child, by any means necessary." Her assets were the corrupt professionals embedded in the system. Her lawyer began filing motions to disqualify Marco based on his alleged criminal ties, a smear campaign meant to distract and delay. The family court clerk, on Elena's payroll, suddenly found that several key documents from the original case, the ones with the questionable signatures, were misfiled and would take days to locate. The psychologist who authored the damning evaluation of Marco was suddenly on an indefinite leave of absence, unavailable for questioning. But they had not accounted for David Miller. The earnest caseworker, armed with nothing but a nagging suspicion and a commitment to protocol, was already in the records room when the judge's order came down. He wasn't reviewing a copy, he was looking at the original physical case file, and in the margin of the psychological report he saw it, a handwritten note from the court clerk 6 years ago that read, "Per Vasquez Atti, hold for final signature." It was a tiny notation, a piece of process. But it directly connected Elena's lawyer to the delayed filing of a critical document. It suggested the report wasn't just submitted, it was managed. Meanwhile, in the private interview room, a quiet revolution was taking place. The guardian ad litem, a woman named Anya Chen, knelt before Sophia. She didn't ask about fear or danger. She handed the little girl crayons and paper. "Can you draw a picture of your family?" she asked softly. Sophia, exhausted from crying, her breath still hitching, nodded. She drew 3 figures, a large one she labeled Aunt Elena, a small one that was herself, and off to the side, separate, a man with dark hair. She pointed to it. "That's my real daddy. In the picture, he's not scary. Aunt Elena said he was scary, but he's not. He looked sad." Anya Chen's report would later state that the child exhibited no fear of the respondent, Marco Rossi, only a profound and distressed longing for connection. This single observation from a neutral court officer began to dismantle Elena's core narrative brick by brick. Marco, sequestered in a conference room with his lawyer, was a storm contained by glass. Arthur Brandt laid out the bleak reality. "They have a 6-year head start, Marco. They have a custody order. They have a paper trail a mile long painting you as a predator. That outburst, while understandable, just gave them ammunition to argue you're volatile. We need to move methodically. We need to find the mother." Isabella, the mention of her name was a fresh wound. Marco's investigators had looked for her years ago, hitting dead ends. They'd assumed she wanted to disappear. Now a new, horrifying possibility emerged. What if she hadn't left willingly? Brandt made another call, this time to a private investigator with a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found. Start over. Assume the initial disappearance wasn't voluntary. Look for pressure points, threats, forged documents against her name. The institutional machine was beginning to grind slowly against Elena's scheme, but the Morty family operated on a different, faster, and far more brutal timeline. The order from New Jersey had been clear, by any means necessary. Their containment strategy had 2 tracks. The first was legal sabotage, which was already in motion. The second was physical leverage. That evening, as David Miller left the courthouse, walking to his car in the municipal parking garage, he was approached by 2 men in suits. They were polite, smiling. They identified themselves as investigators from the state's Family Services Oversight Board. They had questions, they said, about his handling of the Rossi case. Something about procedural irregularities. Could he come with them to answer a few questions downtown? Their badges looked real. Their car was an unmarked sedan. But something in their demeanor, a hardness around the eyes, set off alarms in Miller's mind. He'd made a call earlier to the actual oversight board to verify the audit flag. They had no investigators in the field. "I'd be happy to," Miller said, his voice steady despite the cold dread in his stomach. "But I need to call my supervisor first. Protocol." He reached for his phone. One of the men's smiles vanished. "That won't be necessary." His hand moved inside his jacket. Miller didn't wait to see what came out. He turned and ran, his dress shoes slipping on the concrete, ducking between cars as a sedan engine roared to life behind him. He made it to the stairwell, bursting out onto the street, and lost himself in the evening crowd, his heart pounding with the realization that he was no longer just auditing a file. He was a target. The same night, at a safe house Marco used for sensitive meetings, his head of security, a man named Leo, intercepted a communication. It was a police scanner traffic, vague but concerning, reports of a suspicious vehicle casing a residential block in the suburb where Elena Vasquez's home was located. The description of the vehicle matched one known to be used by Morty enforcers. Leo didn't think they were there for Elena. He believed they were there to remove the problem at its source. To take Sophia permanently and disappear her before the court could untangle the truth. Marco received this information in silence. The courtroom father was gone, replaced by the strategic operator. The law was moving too slowly. The enemy was escalating. His daughter was in the belly of the beast, in a house that was being scouted for a hit. Every instinct told him to storm the place, guns blazing. But that would play right into Elena's hands, proving his violent instability for all the world to see. He looked at Leo. "We can't go through the front door, and we can't wait for the court." Leo nodded. "The back door it is." They began planning not a legal motion, but an extraction. They would need blueprints, schedules, surveillance, and a way to bypass the security system Elena undoubtedly had. They would have to snatch Sophia from her bed and vanish before Elena or the Mortys knew she was gone. It was a felony. It would make him a kidnapper in the eyes of the law. But in his eyes, he was just reclaiming what was already stolen. As Marco and his team plotted in the shadows and David Miller hid in a friend's apartment shaking, the judge was at home reviewing Anya Chen's preliminary notes. The child's drawing, the statement about the picture, the lack of fear. It contradicted the entire basis for the custody order. He picked up the phone and called the chief clerk of the court. "First thing tomorrow," he said, "I want a forensic document examiner in here. I want every signature on the Rossi Vasquez file verified against known samples. And get me the phone records for the courthouse administrative line from 6 years ago. Subpoena them if you have to." The gavel had fallen in the courtroom. Now, a much quieter, more dangerous clock was ticking. A race had begun between the slow grind of justice and the swift, violent actions of those who sought to pervert it. And in a pink bedroom in a quiet suburb, a little girl clutched a worn photograph she'd secretly kept under her mattress. Staring at the face of the man she screamed for, unaware that the war for her life had just moved from the courtroom to the streets, and that before the sun rose, both sides would make their move. The night stretched thin, a tense wire humming with 3 separate, desperate plans. In the quiet suburb, Elena Vasquez paced her living room, the silence of the house a physical weight. Sophia was finally asleep upstairs, the photograph hidden under her mattress. Elena's legal maneuvers were in place, but the call from New Jersey had been unambiguous. The situation was deteriorating. The forensic review ordered by the judge was a disaster she could not bluff her way through. Her handler's final instruction echoed in her mind: "Prepare the exit protocol. The asset is to be relocated by dawn." The asset was Sophia. They were cutting their losses. The plan was no longer to keep her through the courts, but to disappear her entirely. At that same moment, 2 blocks away, Marco Rossi's team was finalizing their own, opposite plan. Leo had obtained the blueprints. The security system was a high-end model, but his tech specialist had identified a vulnerability in the backyard motion sensor loop. A 3-minute window. They would go in at 3 a.m. when the human body is deepest in sleep. The objective was simple: extract Sophia, bypass the local police with a pre-planned route involving vehicle swaps, and reach a private airfield. Marco stared at the grainy thermal image of the house on the monitor. His daughter was a small, warm blob in an upstairs room. "We go in soft. No engagement unless forced. She cannot see violence. he said, his voice a low rasp. He was gambling his entire future, his freedom, on a 3-minute window in a stranger's house. And in a cramped apartment across town, David Miller was not hiding, he was working. The attempted grab in the garage had transformed his professional curiosity into a personal crusade. Using his official credentials from a secure laptop, he accessed deeper databases. He started cross-referencing Elena Vasquez's social security number, issued in Nevada. The deceased sister, Isabella Rossi's purported death certificate, filed in New Mexico. He ran the dates, the names, through a federal portal used to flag identity fraud. The system churned, and then it delivered a result that made his blood run cold. The death certificate for Isabella Rossi shared a digital filing signature with 3 other documents from completely unrelated cases across the country. It was part of a batch flagged 2 years prior in an FBI briefing on document forgery rings operating out of Atlantic City, a known hub for the Morty crime family. Miller wasn't just looking at custody fraud anymore. He was looking at organized crime. He picked up his burner phone, his hands shaking. He had one card to play. He called the direct line for the FBI Field Office's Organized Crime Task Force, a number he'd saved after an interagency seminar. He left a rushed, panicked message detailing the Rossi case, the forgeries, the attempted abduction of a caseworker, and the possible Morty link. He ended with a plea, "I think they're going to move the child tonight. You have to intercept." The race was now a 3-way collision, and it began not at 3 a.m., but at 1:17. A dark van, different from the one Leo's team had spotted earlier, rolled silently to stop 2 houses down from Elena. 4 men dressed in dark tactical gear, not suits, emerged. They moved with a precision that spoke of paramilitary training. These weren't local enforcers, these were cleanup crews. Leo, watching from his surveillance post in a parked utility van, felt a jolt of adrenaline. "Marco, we have a problem. A new team just arrived. They're not casing the place. They're preparing to breach, now." Marco's extraction plan evaporated. How long? Minutes. They're bypassing the front door. Professional tools. "Get in there, get my daughter out. Now." Marco's command was a snarl. The careful, soft approach was over. Inside the house, Elena heard the subtle snick of the back door's lock being picked. She knew the sound. It was Marco Rossi's style to be so quiet. This was the exit protocol. They weren't waiting for dawn. She rushed upstairs, not to Sophia's room, but to her own. She opened a wall safe, pulled out a passport, a bundle of cash, and a syringe filled with a clear sedative. The order was to deliver the child sedated and compliant. As she turned, she found Sophia standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, a stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. "Aunt Elena, I heard a noise." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We're going on a little trip. Come here." Downstairs, the back door swung open. The Morty entry team flowed in, sweeping the kitchen and living room with silenced pistols. At the exact same moment, Leo and 2 of his men blew the circuit on the backyard security light and came through the side garden window, shattering glass. The 2 teams met in Elena's darkened hallway in a stunned, silent standoff. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, both sides recognizing the other as hostile professionals. The sound of Sophia's voice from the top of the stairs broke the spell. "Aunt Elena, you're hurting me." Elena had the girl by the arm, the syringe glinting in the low light from the nightlight. All hell broke loose. A suppressed shot cracked from the Morty team, hitting one of Marco's men in the shoulder. Leo returned fire, driving the lead intruder back into the kitchen. The house became a maze of flashes and shouts. Elena, seeing her path blocked, dragged Sophia back into the bedroom and locked the door. She fumbled with the syringe, her hands slick with sweat. Sophia screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through the chaos. Outside, Marco heard that scream. He had stayed in the command vehicle as planned, but now he was out, sprinting toward the house, his own weapon drawn, ignoring Leo's shouted warnings in his earpiece. He reached the backyard as the flashing lights of local police cars, alerted by neighbors' calls, painted the street red and blue. It was a perfect storm of catastrophe. The Morty team, realizing the operation was blown, initiated their retreat, firing as they fell back to their van. Leo's team was pinned. Elena, trapped upstairs with a hysterical child, saw the police lights through the window and made a split-second decision. She threw the syringe out the window, smoothed her hair, and picked up Sophia, holding her tightly. She would play the victim, the terrified guardian caught in a home invasion. When the police breached the front door, they found a scene of domestic chaos. 2 injured men in the hallway, a terrified woman and child huddled upstairs, and Marco Rossi standing in the backyard, a gun in his hand, surrounded by his security detail. To the responding officers, the narrative wrote itself: a violent home invasion attempt by the estranged, criminal father. Marco was tackled, disarmed, and handcuffed on his daughter's lawn. As he was shoved into a police cruiser, he saw Sofia at an upstairs window, held by Elena, both of them looking down. Elena's face was a masterpiece of tearful relief. Sofia was a mask of pure, shattered confusion. The last thing Marco heard before the door slammed was Elena's voice, loud and clear for the cameras. He tried to take her. He sent these men. Thank God you're here. The news headlines the next morning were brutal. Alleged mob boss in botched kidnapping. Home invasion ATC&TR of bitter custody battle. Marco was held without bail, charged with attempted kidnapping, assault, and a litany of weapons offenses. His one night in jail was the longest of his life. His lawyer, Arthur Brandt, was grim. They played you, Marco. They provoked the exact response they needed. You're now the monster in every headline. The judge will never grant you visitation, let alone custody. But the collision had created something else: evidence. The 2 injured men, one from Marco's team and one from the Morty crew, were in the same hospital under police guard. The Morty gunman, facing attempted murder charges, was offered a deal by a very interested FBI agent, the same one David Miller had called. In exchange for testimony, he began to unravel the Morty family's involvement in the long-term custodial kidnapping scheme. He named Elena Vasquez as a paid operative. He described the exit protocol. Simultaneously, the forensic document examiner, working under the judge's urgent order, confirmed Miller's finding. The signatures were forgeries. The psychologist's credentials were fabricated. The entire foundation of Elena's custody was fraudulent. Judge Jenkins, reviewing the FBI's sudden interest and the forensic report in his chambers, made a monumental decision. He revoked the temporary custody of Elena Vasquez on the grounds of fraud and possible criminal endangerment. He ordered Sofia into immediate emergency state custody, to be placed in a secure foster home, with no visitation rights granted to any party until a full federal review was completed. As child services arrived at Elena's house to take Sofia, Elena was served with a separate warrant for her arrest: conspiracy to commit kidnapping. She was led away in handcuffs, her performance finally over. Sofia, clutching her rabbit, was placed into a social worker's car, more alone than ever. But the wait, it gets worse moment was still to come. The FBI, now in possession of the forged documents and the testimony of the Morty gunman, made the connection David Miller had missed. They tracked the batch of forged death certificates. One of them, for a Jane Doe in Ohio, had been used 5 years ago to help a woman enter the federal witness security program. The U.S. Marshal overseeing that case was contacted. A photo of Isabella Rossi was shown to him. He confirmed with a stunned expression that their witness, living under the name Claire Bennett, was indeed Isabella Rossi. She hadn't run from Marco. She had been placed in hiding after agreeing to testify against the Morty family about their money laundering operations, a deal she took because she believed it was the only way to protect her unborn child from their reach. She had been told her daughter had been placed in a confidential adoption for her own safety. She had been grieving and silent for 6 years. The final, devastating revelation reframed everything. This wasn't just a rivalry kidnapping. The Mortys hadn't just taken Marco's daughter to hurt him. They had taken her to control a witness, to ensure Isabella's perpetual silence. And they had used the family court system to do it, hiding their most valuable piece of leverage in plain sight. Marco, released on bail under strict monitoring, learned this from an ashen-faced Arthur Brandt. His wife was alive. She was in witness protection. She had never abandoned their child. She had been manipulated just as he had. The enemy's scheme was deeper, more sadistic than he had ever imagined. He stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out over the city. The legal battle was now a federal case. His daughter was in a state facility, surrounded by strangers. His wife was a ghost in the system. The Morty family, though rattled, was still out there. The game was no longer about winning custody. It was about survival, reunion, and a reckoning that would require him to step out of the shadows and into a fight he could not win with a gun. He had to use the very system that had been weaponized against him. He turned to Brandt, his eyes hollow but resolved. "Get me a meeting with the federal prosecutor. Tell them I have information. Tell them I want to deal for my family." Marco Rossi's deal with the federal government was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. In a secure room in the U.S. Attorney's office, he laid out everything he knew about the Morty family's operations, the money laundering fronts, the smuggling routes, the corrupted officials on their payroll, and the violent enforcement of their contracts. In exchange, he asked for three things: immunity for himself on all charges related to the attempted extraction, the dropping of all state charges stemming from the night of the home invasion, and a unified effort to safely reunite him with his wife and daughter. The prosecutors agreed to the first two. The third, they said, was a matter for the family court, but they would support it. His testimony became the linchpin of a sweeping RICO indictment against the upper echelon of the Morty organization. Elena Vasquez, facing life in prison for her role in the kidnapping conspiracy, also flipped, providing detailed records of the 6-year operation, including the names of the corrupt psychologist, lawyer, and court clerk. The system that had been weaponized against Marco now turned on its corruptors with brutal efficiency. While the federal case built, a separate, quieter battle was fought in family court. With Elena's fraud proven and her arrest, the primary barrier to Marco's custody claim was his own history. The guardian ad litem, Anya Chen, was tasked with determining if reunification was in Sophia's best interest. She conducted a series of monitored visits between Marco and his daughter in a neutral, child-friendly setting. The first visit was agonizing. Sophia was shy, clinging to her caseworker. Marco, stripped of his usual authority, was just a nervous man in a chair. He didn't talk about the past or the danger. He asked about her rabbit. He listened as she haltingly told him about her favorite book. He didn't force a hug. He just sat there, letting her see him. After 3 visits, Sophia brought him the drawing she'd made for Anya Chen, the one with the 3 figures. She pointed to the man with dark hair. "This is you," she said quietly. "I keep it so I don't forget." The emotional breakthrough was one thing. The legal hurdle was another. The family court judge needed assurance that Marco's world was no longer a threat. The federal prosecutors provided it. They submitted a formal declaration that Marco Rossi was a cooperating witness in a major organized crime case, that his testimony had been instrumental, and that his family would remain under federal protection. It was an unprecedented intervention, turning his former life from a liability into a form of civic contribution. Then came the moment that rewrote the ending. The U.S. Marshals Service, overseeing Isabella Rossi's new identity, presented her with the evidence: the forged death certificate, the testimony about the kidnapping, the photos of her daughter, now 6. The carefully maintained fiction of her daughter's adoption shattered. After days of psychological evaluation and secure debriefing, she was given a choice: remain in protective custody as Claire Bennett, or re-enter the world as Isabella Rossi to reclaim her child. She didn't hesitate. Reunion between mother and daughter was arranged at a secure federal facility. Marco was not allowed to be present. He watched the live feed from another room, his knuckles white. Sophia was led into a playroom. Isabella, who had not seen her child since she was a newborn, stood waiting, her hands trembling. For a long moment, Sophia just stared. Then she took a step forward. "You look like the picture in Aunt Elena's album," she whispered. "The one she said was my mommy in heaven." Isabella fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, and opened her arms. Sophia walked into them. The connection, forged in genetics and severed by cruelty, was instantly, visibly restored. The bond was primal and immediate. With Isabella's return, the custody landscape transformed completely. She was the mother, a victim of the same conspiracy, with no criminal record. The federal government advocated for the reunification of the Rossi family as a matter of justice and witness safety. The family court judge, Judge Jenkins, made his ruling. Citing the extraordinary circumstances, the proven fraud, the mother's lawful rights, and the father's cooperation with federal authorities, he terminated the state's custody. He granted primary physical custody to Isabella Rossi, with supervised visitation rights for Marco, to be gradually expanded as the family stabilized in their new, protected life. The legal dominoes continued to fall. The Morty family's leadership was convicted on all counts, receiving sentences totaling hundreds of years. Elena Vasquez received 15 years for her part in the conspiracy, her sentence reduced for cooperation. The corrupt officials were fired and faced their own criminal charges. David Miller received a commendation from the Department of Justice and was promoted to a special investigations unit. But the final surprising detail emerged not in a courtroom, but in a therapist's office. During a play therapy session, Sophia was given a family dollhouse. She placed a mother doll, a father doll, and a child doll together in a bedroom. Then she took a fourth neutral doll and placed it outside the front door. The therapist asked who that was. Sophia said, "That's Leo. He stands guard, so the bad dreams can't get in." Marco's head of security, the man who had helped plan the extraction, had become a silent, steadfast figure in the child's life, a symbol of protection rather than violence. Marco, learning of this, offered Leo a permanent position not as head of security, but as head of household safety, a legitimate job with a generous salary. Leo accepted. The man who once orchestrated underworld tactics now devoted himself to installing the best alarm systems and teaching a little girl how to ride a bike. The Rossi family did not get a fairy tale ending. They got a fragile, hard-won new beginning. They lived in a nondescript house in an undisclosed location, their lives monitored and protected. Marco left his old business entirely, his wealth now managed by legitimate trustees. Isabella began the long process of healing, learning to be a mother to a daughter who had been raised on lies. And Sophia, once a pawn in a vicious game, slowly learned what it meant to be a daughter, to be safe, to be loved. The scream that had blown the scheme apart in the courtroom did more than expose a kidnapping. It triggered a chain reaction that toppled a criminal enterprise, exposed corruption, and rewrote the fate of a family. It proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against a lie is a single, undeniable truth, shouted from the heart of a child. And as the Rossi family sat down to their first quiet dinner together, in a home with no fake names, no hidden syringes, and no looming threats, the long night finally began to lift, giving way to a cautious, treasured dawn. Sophia's scream in that courtroom was more than a child's cry, it was a fault line. It exposed not just a single kidnapping, but the terrifying vulnerability of the very systems designed to protect the innocent. For 6 years, forged papers and paid testimonies had twisted family law into a weapon. It makes you wonder, how many other stories are hiding in plain sight, buried under perfectly fabricated paperwork? The Rossi case forces a difficult question. When the rules can be so expertly weaponized, where does real safety lie? Is it in the letter of the law, or in the messy, undeniable truth of a child reaching for a parent she was never supposed to know? The answer, this story suggests, lies in the collision of the two. It took a corrupt system's own processes, activated by one honest clerk and one dogged caseworker, to ultimately undo its own corruption. For Marco and Isabella, the aftermath is a life of constant calibration. Trust for them will always be a cautious construction. Every new face is assessed, every routine is a potential vulnerability. Their love for Sophia is both their greatest strength and their most profound anxiety. They are building a life not on the forgetting of trauma, but on its careful integration. They are teaching their daughter that it's okay to have memories of Aunt Elena, to feel confused, to miss the person she was told to love, while learning to embrace the parents who fought hell to get her back. The lingering shadow of this story isn't the crime family behind bars. It's the unsettling reality that the most sophisticated cages sometimes have no bars at all, just official stamps and convincing lies. It challenges us to look closer, to question the smooth narratives presented to us, especially when they seek to separate a child from a parent without a fight. Sophia's story ended not with a magical erasure of the past, but with its reclamation. The photograph under the mattress is no longer a secret. It sits in a frame on her dresser, next to new pictures of beach trips and birthday cakes. The man in the photo is no longer a scary story. He's the dad who reads her bedtime stories, his voice a steady promise in the dark. The scream that once signaled chaos has quieted, replaced by the ordinary, precious sound of a family learning, day by day, how to be whole. If you were gripped by this incredible journey of a family torn apart, and stitched back together by sheer force of truth, then you're exactly the kind of viewer I make these stories for. There are so many more tales of resilience, shocking twists, and battles for justice waiting for you. To make sure you never miss one, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Sophia's story. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.